welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. The future of auto giants General Motors and Chrysler remains up in the air 1 week after Senate Republicans rejected a deal to grant the automakers $14 billion in emergency loans. Chrysler is closing all of its plants today. They won't reopen until at least January 19. General Motors and Ford have said they too will idle some plants. Bloomberg News reports a Bush administration rescue plan would be announced as early as today, but is unclear what concessions would have to be made by the auto companies and the United Auto Workers. The White House says it is considering allowing General Motors and Chrysler to go bankrupt in what it describes as a, quote, orderly way. White House Press Secretary Dana Perino addressed the issue at a press briefing on Thursday.
I will tell you this, the president is not going to allow a disorderly collapse of the companies. That is not an option. I think some people have assumed that that's one of the things that we would decide. That is not going to be the case. When the president says we're going to take all of this into account, he means that we're going to do something. And we're nearing a conclusion. We're narrowing options. I just don't have anything for you today.
Let me just ask two things quickly. Do you think the week will end without a decision? And two, this may have been asked before, so forgive me if it's a repeat, but when you say disorderly collapse, can you explain what that means? Does that mean that there's some kind of collapse that's okay, but a certain other kind of one is not?
By that I mean disorderly collapse would be something very chaotic that is a shock to the system. If there's an orderly way to do bankruptcies that provides for more of a soft landing, I think that's what we would be talking about. That would be one of the options. I'm not saying that is necessarily what it would be announced.
Dana Perino at the White House. We're joined now in Michigan by union activist and writer GREGG SHOTWELL. He worked at General Motors for 30 years before retiring in November. He's a longtime dissident member of the United Auto Workers and co-founder of the website soldiersofsolidarity.com. GREGG SHOTWELL, tell us what's happening in Michigan and your response to the possibility of letting these auto companies go bankrupt.
They let these auto companies go bankrupt, it's going to turn this recession into a depression. I'm shocked that they're even contemplating this. There's no such thing as an orderly bankruptcy. Millions of people would be affected. I don't mean directly. That General Motors only employs 73,000 UAW members, but it's all the suppliers. And those suppliers are going to be affected today. It's going to start with Chrysler, shutting down, for the next 30 days. Anybody that supplies them in any way is out of work, and they're not getting sub-pay. Many of these people won't even get unemployment. And then General Motors is shutting down all these plants now, too. This loan that they're asking for is often mischaracterized as a bailout. It's not a bailout, it's a loan. And it's a result of this credit crisis and some gross mismanagement. I'll concede that. The only people who are not at fault in this are the workers. The workers show up every day, they do their jobs, they do them well, they do them diligently. And they're the only people who should not have to make any concessions. And in fact, they already have made concessions. And I don't just mean UAW members. Wages have been falling in the United States since 1973. People cannot keep up.
GREGG SHOTWELL, one of the things that would happen, obviously, under a bankruptcy, whether you call it orderly or disorderly, is that the union contracts that already exist would, in essence, be then nullified, wouldn't they? And whatever emerged from bankruptcy would not have to deal with the existing commitments to the workers. Well, bankruptcy is not that simple. Delphi has been in bankruptcy since October of 2005, and they are still in bankruptcy. It took them almost 3 years to renegotiate their contracts. So and Delphi is not a tenth the size of the General Motors octopus. General Motors, Chrysler, they would be in courts for years. The only people who would make money on this would be attorneys.
the danger of this that I see as well is that, you know, in the 90s when the auto companies were making billions of dollars, they were taking profits out of North America and investing them overseas, in Europe, South America, and Asia. So there's been a huge transfer of assets overseas. Now, those assets would remain protected in bankruptcy. So what, in effect, they've done is undermined the manufacturing base in the United States so that they could become a major importer to the United States. You see, they already have fuel-efficient, small fuel-efficient cars that they're making in Europe and in Asia and in South America. They're ready for import. And they would like to be like Toyota. Yes, Toyota has plants in the United States, but Toyota imports about 46% of all the cars it sells in the United States. That's what General Motors is setting itself up to do, and they're going to use this capitalist disaster to help them wipe out the dealerships and close the plants. And Congress is just going to help them strong-arm the unions into giving up any job security or gains. Also, you're right about the bankruptcy, and this is one of their goals, is to wipe out the legacy costs. You know, the people who earned a pension and earned health care and retirement in the past, they would take that away. To me, it's like a 30-year mortgage. I paid my mortgage every week, and I paid it off. Now that house is mine. Now they want to say, well, we're going to take it back.
No, obviously there are those who continue to say that the labor costs in the auto industry, especially in the big three, are way out of whack. And could you talk, for those who are not familiar with, how this misrepresentation of what the labor costs really are of today's workforce among the big three has been created?
Well, there's a good reason that the transplants in the South have not been organized, and that's mainly because they make as much or more money as organized workers. And that was a strategy that the Japanese plants did on purpose because they didn't want the plants organized. So they pay as much. The real difference is in what they owe the retirees, what they call the legacy costs. Now, you'll hear in the media, they'll say GM workers get $73 an hour and Toyota workers only get $45 an hour. They arrive at that $73 an hour by tacking on the cost of all the retirees onto the active worker. This is fraudulent bookkeeping. This is essentially a Ponzi scheme, wherein the old investors are paid off by the new investors. In other words, the old investors, the retirees, their pay, their pension and health care comes from the new investors, the workers. I heard Keith Olbermann compare it to saying the average wage in America, and then you would add on everybody who's collecting Social Security or pensions. It's really preposterous. On top of that, I want to emphasize this. I earned my pension while I was working, not years somebody else. The guy working today isn't earning my pension. I already earned that. General Motors should have taken that money, set it aside, put it in a trust. If they didn't do that, then they've committed a malfeasance. That's their responsibility. Also, when I was working, they charged the customer more money based on their excuse that we have to pay more for this worker because of health care and pension in his retirement. So we have to charge the customer more, whether that was 1980 or 1990. They raised those prices. What did they do with that money? They apparently didn't put it in a trust. But they did, and this is a fact, they've invested largely overseas. General Motors and Ford, they have more plants overseas than they have in the United States. They're ready to become major importers to the United States and dump all their responsibilities to the people who made those profits.